Welcome to New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.
What a week of playoff basketball in the Big Apple. The Knicks, they had a gut punch of a loss in Game 5 of their series against the Sixers, but then they showed the resilience that they have shown all season long in Game 6. The Knickerbockers knocked off the Sixers down in Philly to win their first round series 4-2. So now it's on to round 2, where the Knicks will battle the Pacers. Tim Kitzrow, what are the Knicks doing right now?
The Knicks are heating up.
Yeah, the Knicks are heating up indeed, and playoff fever is all over the Big Apple as the Knicks are back in the conference semifinals for the second consecutive year. The Knickerbockers, they're trying to make it to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time since 1999. But before we can talk conference finals, we have to preview and break down this second-round matchup, and we're going to do it with a contributor to Knicks Film School, the talented basketball analyst, Ben Ritholtz. How you doing, man?
Doing great. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Benji, glad to have you here. Love your work. Been loving it for some time.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming. It's good. You ready to talk about the series?
So ready. So excited.
So ready. All right, guys, we got to talk about it. It's Knicks versus Pacers. And Ben, when you look at this matchup between the Knicks and the Pacers, this is one of two teams with contrasting styles, right? I think we'd be fair to say that, especially when it comes to talking about pace. That's going to be a thing you're going to hear a lot in the series. How do you assess this overall matchup between the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers in this upcoming series?
I think what's so exciting about the series and what I'm most excited to see is that contrast. They are such contrasting styles. The Pacers are this flowing run-and-gun type of team, obviously head of the snake, Tyrese Halliburton. The Knicks are a ground team, right? They're going to grind you out. They're going to out-physical you, right? So it's this clash of flow versus kind of power. And who can kind of dictate their terms on the other team, I think, is going to be the team that's going to win.
Yeah, you would think that is what is going to happen, and there's so much that we'll get into, right, because we know what the Knicks are really good at, offensive rebound, and we know the Pacers are good at pushing the pace and trying to get the ball up and down the court, and that's what makes it so interesting. It's almost like boxing, right?
Yeah.
You say, like, styles make the fight, and
Sure.
it feels like that here. So what we're going to do, folks, we're also going to look at some key matchups. And so, Ben, which player matchups do you think are going to be most crucial when it comes to determining the outcome of this series? If you look at some player matchups, what are the ones that you really like that are going to be very instrumental in determining this outcome?
Yeah, I think it starts at the head of the snake, and it's funny because Jalen Brunson and Tyrese Halliburton, they're so different. They play such different games, and they're not going to be guarding each other for the vast majority of the series. But I still think it's the key matchup because what they will do is they're going to try to force the other one to guard them on both ends. Brunson's going to try, whoever Tyrese Halliburton is guarding, he's going to call him into the action, try to work on him. Halliburton's going to try to get Brunson into all of his actions. So even though it's not a traditional matchup, they're the two point guards, but they will not be guarding each other. I can guarantee you that. They're both the weak points defensively on their respective teams. But how successful can they be in hunting the other one and then trying to exploit the matchup? That's going to be a key. The other one I'm looking at, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, former teammates in Toronto. So there's something super exciting about that, getting to watch those guys go head-to-head. I imagine they'll start the series guarding one another. OG, hopefully, the defender that he is, can allow the Knicks to play that matchup on Siakam without helping. Play it one-on-one. One of the ways Indiana forces help and therefore advantages and be able to start spreading the ball to their shooters is if you got to come help on Siakam post-ups and drives. If OG can kind of hold his own there and force Siakam to play one-on-one and force misses, I think that'll go a long way in the Knicks winning the series.
All right, so those are two really good matchups to watch. And, yeah, I'm very intrigued to see about OG, as you mentioned there. Can he hold his own there and not have to be helped so they can get the stuff out to their shooters, get the ball to their shooters? That would be dangerous for the Knicks there. Now, when you look at this Pacers team, Ben, they started the season as a team that could not stop anyone at all. But following their trade for a guy you mentioned, Pascal Siakam, the team, they moved up in terms of defensive rating. They were middle of the pack at one point and came back down, but they moved up there. On offense, when you talk about the Knicks, how should they look to exploit the Pacers' defensive weaknesses?
Yeah, so talked about it a little bit at the beginning. Brunson finding Halliburton. How do we get Halliburton into actions? Because he is their weakest defender. He's a very poor defender. And you want him to work on the defensive end so he's doesn't have all of his energy on the offensive end. Hasn't been as healthy second half of the year, Halliburton. Struggled a bit in the second half of the year, so you really want to put him through the ringer on the defensive end, force him to guard many, many actions. That's one thing. The Pacers don't have a very natural defender for Jalen Brunson. I think Andrew Nembhard will probably get the nod to start the series. Aaron Nesmith had some time on Brunson during the regular season. He picks up a lot of fouls, and we know how good Brunson is at drawing those fouls. I don't think they're going to go there. I think it'll be Nembhard, who's only 6'3", pretty slight. And we know Jalen Brunson loves to exploit small defenders. So can the Pacers, just at the point of attack, really handle Brunson at all? Can he get downhill over and over again against their slighter, smaller defenders like Nembhard? If they can do that, the Knicks, consistently, I don't know if the Pacers have a ton of answers defensively. Even though they've gotten better, Siakam's a versatile defender. He added a lot to their team. There are a bunch of weak points there, and they're small and they're slight. So I think Brunson's going to have his opportunities to score the basketball. And if you can't stop Jalen Brunson, you can't stop the Knicks.
Yeah, and the matchup, I think, is very likely, as you mentioned, they put Nembhard on him. And we have to remember, a second-year player. This is his first time guarding a player. You know, he did something on Dame. We saw that, right? But the caliber that Jalen Brunson is and how good he is, especially with the head fakes, the footwork. Will Nembhard be disciplined enough to not draw those fouls against Jalen Brunson? That's something definitely to watch. Now, when we talk about the Pacers, folks, a really good offensive team. Ranked first in team points per game, 123.3. And Ben, second in the NBA in pace this season. See, we brought up that word again, pace with the Pacers. Yeah. And they average 16.6 fast break points per game. What, in your eyes, makes Indiana so good offensively? And do the Knicks, we know they're a good defensive team, but do they have the tools to stop an offensive juggernaut in the Pacers?
The Knicks really struggled. They played 3 games against the Pacers this season. Now, the personnel shifted a lot on both sides, so it's hard to draw a ton from the film in the first 3 games. But what I will say is Tyrese Halliburton pick and rolls the Knicks struggled with consistently throughout. Really hard to guard. The Pacers, it's not just, when you talk about pace, you think about fast breaks. You think about running off of misses, running off of steals. The Pacers' half-court offense is fast. Every action is so quick. They get into the secondary action so fast. Halliburton's orchestrating. And it's a lot of communication. It's a lot of understanding where can we switch, where don't we switch, where are we helping from. You have to really nail all those little things on the defensive end if you're the Knicks, because you can all of a sudden get in crazy rotation. You're not going to be able to keep up with that kind of speed, right? So I think they do have the personnel. OG Anunoby, of course, you weaponize him in so many ways on the defensive end. I think he'll spend some time on Halliburton, but I think, as we said, he'll probably start on Siakam. But his ability to disrupt things in so many different ways, whether in help or on the ball, is going to be key. Hartenstein's the anchor back there. Mitchell Robinson is an anchor back there. You got to be able to switch against Indiana, though, right? So will Hartenstein and will Mitch be able to switch onto Halliburton's pick and rolls and contain him? I think that'll be a super key for the Knicks in terms of trying to slow down the pace of that attack.
Let's follow up on that right there, because something that you said I thought that was really good that people don't think about with the Pacers is the pace of their action in the half court, right? And when you think about pace, like you said, a lot of it is running on fast breaks. And the Pacers, they also do run off of makes. They are prone to do that as well. Do you like how their half-court offense looks, and do you think it could be problematic for the Knicks? And when we do this in juxtaposition to what we saw with the Sixers, a more deliberate half-court offense. Because there's going to have to be an adjustment for the Knicks in this series as they deal with the pace in the half-court. So do you like them to be able to make that adjustment here?
I think the advantage you have in any series as opposed to a regular season is you have 4 days now to prep. And we know Tibbs, if he's good at anything, it's prepping, right? So he's going to have these guys ready for each and every action. It is going to be a bit of a shock to the system, especially with an unhealthy Embiid in Philadelphia. They're slow basketball. Now, Maxi's super fast, but their actions are pretty deliberate and slow, as you mentioned. It's pick and roll for Embiid. It's dump the ball into the post. Easier to handle just in terms of computing in your mind what's going to go on the floor. You could see game 1, I think, the Knicks adjusting to that in real time. That speed, that pace, the amount of actions they run. It's not just one post-up. They'll run an action on one side of the floor just to get to the action on the other side, right? It's a very complex offense. The advantage for the Knicks is they do have smart defensive players. The Nova boys, they've been through all these big games before. They know each other. The ability to communicate to one another in a pinch, what they need to do. I do think the Knicks are capable, but I do think it's going to be a shock to the system, and it's going to be interesting to see how the Knicks can kind of grow into the series. Will they be able to adjust to the speed and the pace? Yeah,
and that's why I asked the question, because we talk about a lot of adjustments from game to game within the playoffs, but sometimes it's even series to series and opponent to opponent, right, in terms of how you have to adjust, so it's good. So let's talk a little bit more about defense with the Knickerbockers, because what should the Knicks be looking to do in terms of strategies that might work best to slow down the Pacers' key players, and specifically in those half-court actions that can vary a lot and have a lot going on? What do you think they should be doing?
Yeah, we talked about switching. Switching is the Bucks did a good job. Actually, if the Bucks did anything well in that series, it was throughout the series kind of slowing the Pacers' actions down by just switching every pick and roll. If you can do that, and I think Hartenstein and Mitch might have their difficulty kind of switching out onto Halliburton, but they can probably contain him decently. And then there's a question of, do you go to Precious Achiuwa at the 5, who's their most switchable big? and I think he absolutely can contain Halliburton in that kind of action. So that's something to think about as well. The other thing that the Knicks could pivot to is sticking their centers on Pascal Siakam instead of Miles Turner. Siakam's not a great shooter. He's the guy that's going to be down low most often. Turner kind of spaces out. The Bucks did this a bit in the series as well. The Knicks haven't shown this in the regular season. But do they flip that matchup so that the Knicks center is guarding Siakam and you have maybe Josh Hart or maybe OG Anunoby guarding Miles Turner? So he's more now involved in the actions. You can keep your centers at the rim to contain and be that last line of defense. And now you don't have to deal with your centers guarding out as frequently.
I like that. I like that could be a good defensive wrinkle. And, folks, this is why you look at the tape. This is why also coaches, you talked about they haven't shown this. Sometimes you save some of these things for certain matchups and things like that here now. We'll get to a little bit more about the Knicks centers when we talk about Miles Turner.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk about the Knicks rotation heading into this series, Ben, because we saw Tom Thibodeau, we saw him play just 7 players in Game 6 against Philly, and I know that gave some Knicks fans a lot of stress in that. Like, why isn't he playing Precious Achiuwa? Why isn't he playing other people? How do you foresee the rotation and minutes distribution working out for the Knicks in this series? Because you just mentioned Precious Achiuwa, and you mentioned it as though you think there are some opportunities for him. I'm inclined to agree with you on that.
Yeah.
But how do we see the minutes working out in the series, especially against a Pacers team that we know is probably inclined to go a little bit deeper here, and they like to push the pace. They want to keep players fresh. Do you think the minutes and rotation will change a little bit for the Knicks in the series?
Yeah, I think asking Hart, DiVincenzo, Brunson to play the types of minutes loads they were playing at the end of the Philly series is asking too much against a team that runs up and down the way Indiana does. And look, the more you do it, the more tiring it gets. You're doing this for a second straight series now, playing 45, 46 minutes a night. I don't think the Knicks can start the series this way against this team. If you have to narrow it as the series goes on, like they did against Philadelphia, maybe you do. To start, I think you give Alec Burks a nod as an 8th guy. I do. I think Bogdanovich was an unfortunate loss because he was at least giving you some minutes, giving you some shooting. If Precious, I don't think he's going to play the 4. So if he's playing the 5, you only have one sub in Deuce McBride for the rest of your 4 players.
Right.
To rotate in and out. That's too much. I think you got to have one more guard in the rotation. It's got to be Alec Burks. He's got a playoff experience. Tibbs does have that history with him. I know he struggled in the regular season, but can he give you 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes of a night just of a shooting threat, a guy who can at least handle the ball a little bit? I think there are guys on the Pacers he can guard, especially with the second unit, that won't kill you defensively. I could see him getting a nod in Game 1, and if he performs decently, maybe having a role as the series progresses. Precious, I don't know if he gets Game 1 minutes. It might be a wrinkle that the Knicks throw, similar to how it happened against Philly, where there was some foul trouble, and he played such a key role in that win. Was it Game 2? Game 4. Game 4.
Game 4, yeah.
Game 4, where Precious came in and was a key component to the defense down the stretch, throws a different wrinkle, a different type of defender, versatile, can switch onto Halliburton, do all sorts of different things. I think he'll have a role to play in the series, even if it's not in Game 1.
Ben, you know what happened there, and you mentioned Burks, and I love that you mentioned it here, right, as a wrinkle. But some Knicks fans are going to sit there. You know where I'm going with this, Ben. Some Knicks fans are going to sit there and say, Ben, did you watch him after the trade? And which is fair.
Unfortunately.
And he did not. We're not going to lie to the people. He did not play well. But there's a need here. Yeah. You talked about him. You said 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 minutes that he can give him. If Tibbs plays him, how short is that leash? If he's not hitting shots or he's not defending, how short should that leash be if he does play Alec Burks?
I think it'll be short. I think he'll have a few minutes. I think he'll have a few minutes to prove that he's at least up for the challenge. And I just think it's worthwhile to give it a look early and see if he has anything to give you. You talk about the Pacers also, like the second unit comes in, like Halliburton takes a seat. In comes T.J. McConnell. Now that guy, first of all, historic Knicks killer, as Knicks fans know. Historic Knicks killer. Every time they play him, he destroys them. He did it in the regular season again. And he's a jitterbug, man. The pace does not lessen when he comes in the game. So, it's not just that you're playing at this pace when Halliburton's in the game. It's 48 minutes at that pace because their backup unit runs. Obi Toppin comes in the game. We know he's not slowing anything down.
Nope.
One of the fastest players in the league in transition. So, again, you're now asking this team asking Josh Hart, you're asking Dante DiVincenzo to play 44, 45, 46 minutes at that pace. If this series goes any length, I don't think that they can sustain it. So to me, it's give it a shot. The leash will be short, I'm sure. Maybe it's 1-2 games at most. But like, if he can show you something, you take a chance. You need everybody in the playoffs at some point.
Oh, you do.
And he may have something to give you. He's a good enough shooter. He gives you a threat there. He has enough experience. Maybe he surprises us and gives you a few games in the series that can help you.
Hey, I think Knicks fans will take that surprise after 100%. What they saw following the trade for sure. Ben, who do you see as a potential X factor for the Knicks in this matchup? Because we talk about this every series as an X factor for the series. I feel like it could be Josh Hart again. He was that X factor in the last series. We saw that, how he performed and hit the shots against Philly. Who's your X factor for this series against Indy?
That's where I'm going.
Going with Hart.
It's Josh Hart again, and I'll tell you why. Like, Indiana's going to do the same thing as Philly, even though Philly slowly adjusted as Hart made shots, and it wasn't as aggressive in terms of helping off of him. But you saw it on the key shot of the series. Tyrese Maxey stunts at Josh Hart, and then he's like, you know what? I'm more worried about Dante DiVincenzo. Have at it. Shoot the ball. They're going to do the same thing here. Like, they're going to force Josh Hart to shoot the ball. The help's going to come from Josh Hart. If Josh Hart makes shots, that strategy becomes a loser. And that helps the Knicks. Like, if there's no one to help off of, if there's no one on the perimeter to really help off of, how do you contain Jalen Brunson? Especially if you're the Pacers who don't have those one-on-one defenders. So, like, Josh Hart making shots changes this offense. And that's an X factor. If he continues, now maybe he's not going to shoot like he shot against Philly. That's a lot to ask. If he can keep it at 37, 38%, make a couple threes a night, keep them honest. You can't help off of him as liberally as they were. I think that changes the series for the Knicks again. So he's definitely, to me, the X factor. I think Deuce McBride as well. He's a guy. And Deuce we've seen thus far, and I think Knicks fans will agree, watching, have been very impressed. He's hit some big shots. Yeah. He has not been afraid to shoot. So, you know, he's an X factor. We've seen the big shots that he can hit. He had a big three, obviously, in that Game 6 win against Philly. Now, this is a matchup where we talked about the contrasting styles, Ben. You got the best offensive rebounding team in the league, in the Knicks, okay, who are going up against the Pacers, who gave up during the regular season the most offensive boards in the league. Yeah. How crucial is it going to be for the Knicks to dominate on the glass once again in this series? I think it's everything. I think if there was one key, I think that's it. Because if the Knicks dominate the offensive glass the way they did against Philly, the way they have in the regular season against Indiana, I don't think Indy can win this series. They have to find a way to at least make it a reasonable rebounding differential. And it's hard because Miles Turner, intimidating presence in the paint as a defender, good offensive player, he's skinny compared to the centers that the Knicks have. Like Hartenstein, Mitch, push him around in the paint. Josh Hart's flying in. Like if Tyrese Halliburton's guarding Josh Hart, which he might, is he boxing Josh Hart out? I mean, Andrew Nembhard, small, like they're just a small team. They're thin and they're small. And the Knicks, as we know, they're just brawny, they're big, they're physical as hell. If you can't keep them off the boards, I don't think they can win the series. And Indiana, by the end of the Milwaukee series, when Miles Turner wasn't on the floor, they were playing Siakam and Obi together. I don't know if that unit is viable against the Knicks. Like, that is a small front line. So, like, they benched their backup bigs in Isaiah Jackson and in Jalen Smith, who themselves aren't huge, but at least are decent rebounders. How does Indiana match if the Knicks play 48 minutes of Hartenstein and Mitch, two elite offensive rebounders? How do the Pacers keep them off the boards, especially if Miles Turner's not in the game? To me, that is the key to the series, and if the Knicks can dominate the offensive glass again, I think they put themselves in a really good position. I'm with you on it being the keys to the series, because if they don't dominate the offensive glass, and I was talking about this with Stephen Bondi, great Knicks beat writer for the New York Post, he was mentioning, hey, well, if they don't dominate an offensive glass, and usually when you're an aggressive offensive rebounding team like the Knicks are, that opens up exactly what the Pacers want to do, as you know, in terms of getting out in transition, and that's where that could be a problem for the Knicks there, too. So, when it comes to previewing this series, there's going to be a lot of talk surrounding how the Knicks defend Tyrese Halliburton, Pascal Siakam as well, too. That's going to be a lot of the focus. You're going to hear those two names. Yeah. However, you mentioned the name. Center Miles Turner can be dangerous, and the reason is because he can step out and hit the outside shot. Should Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein defend him? Because you were talking about other options. Yeah. And maybe not go into drop coverage in the terms of the way the defense. We know Tibbs likes that. He wants to drop back, wants the guys to protect the rim. Or is this an opportunity for Tibbs to go with Precious Achiuwa in the series, who can defend bigs on the perimeter? We saw some of that Game 4 you mentioned against Philly, his ability to close out, defend on the perimeter. Is this an option to go that way, or should Tibbs think about just the way that Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson defend Miles Turner? It's a great question. I think as much as the Philly and Indiana series are very different,
Right.
I love the experience the Knicks got guarding Joel Embiid, Maxey pick and rolls to prepare them for this series. Because it's a similar idea. Obviously, Embiid is a different kind of beast. But to guard pick and pop bigs like that, it takes a lot of different strategies. And the Knicks showed a bunch of different coverages that they can throw at Miles Turner if the center's guarding him. You can drop and you could send the guard back to Miles Turner and end up in basically a switch. It's called called a veer switch. The Knicks will show some of that. So you'll see like Dante DiVincenzo close out to the Miles Turner 3 and Isaiah Hartenstein stay on Halliburton. They'll do some of that. You could send another defender from the weak side to cover the Miles Turner pop and then rotate out of that. The Knicks did some of that against Embiid effectively at times. I think they'll see some of that against Miles Turner pick and pops. I think Tibbs will also sometimes just live with Miles Turner threes. Good shooter. He can hurt you. There against the Bucks, he had one great game, and the Knicks, he's had 7 threes against the Knicks in the past. I think there will be times where he'll be frustrated that he'll be wide open, and Tibbs will just be like, you know what? Compared to all the other threats on the floor, Tyrese Halliburton, you got Aaron Nesmith, one of the best shooters in the league, Pascal Siakam, an all-star, great offensive player. I can live with a decently contested, as Hartenstein or Mitchell recovering, I can live with a three-pointer that he takes. I think you'll see all of that at different times of the series and try to keep the Pacers off kilter. And then, as we discussed earlier, whether it's Precious subbing in and able to switch that action, or whether it's putting a guy like your power forwards on Miles Turner and daring him to post up, which it's not really his game.
It's not his game, right.
Not his game, and putting your centers on Siakam. I think that's the other strategy that you may see some of at some point. I don't think to start the series, but maybe as a late series wrinkle.
This is one of the matchups I'm really keeping my eye on in that and just how they defend that. Because, maybe it's a little overreaction. You talked about game 1 of the Pacers against the Bucks. You saw Turner go crazy in that one from outside. Maybe he's capable. We know he's capable from the outside, so we'll see. All right, game 1, Monday night. It's always important to get off to a good start. But how important is it for the Knicks to set the tone, Ben, in terms of how they want to play in this series to come up with a victory? Just really setting the tone, that identity of how they want to play, and no pun intended, but control the pace in this series against the Pacers. How important is this in game 1?
Love how you asked the question. It's like, because for the Knicks, it really is about setting a tone. And from the jump, being the physical team that you're known to be, pushing guys like Halliburton around, making them feel you from the jump. The hope is, like the last time the Knicks played more of a kind of a finesse team. They played Cleveland in round 1 last year. They established a tone right away, and Cleveland never recovered. And I think that that's going to be key here is, again, you have a finesse team. You have a great shooting team. They want to get into all these different actions, do all these different things offensively. If every cut and every screen is met with resistance and physicality, you might be able to just bump them right out of their comfort zone from the tip. And I guarantee you, Tom Thibodeau is on that from the jump. Like, this is how we have to play this team, is with tremendous physicality. Our strength advantage needs to be utilized right away. Get them off of their game early and hope they never recover it. I think that absolutely is key from the first possession.
It's funny, as soon as I asked you the question and I was thinking about it, I immediately thought about Cleveland, too.
Yeah.
And just how, for lack of a better term, folks, the Knicks punked them last year, right? Just with their physicality. And I wonder if some of that, the same can happen there, because I think whoever sets the tone is important. If the Knicks are trying to play catch-up and get into a track meet with the Pacers, I think, know that does not bode well for them. Not really sure the Pacers want to get really physical with the Knicks, but if they're feeling everything, as you said, it's going to be tough. All right, Ben, last thing. Here we go.
All right, let's do it.
You're so good at what you do, all your amazing analysis. But it always comes down to this, whoever sits in this chair and I ask. It comes down to one thing that we've got to ask. What is your prediction for this series? Who wins and in how many games? What are you doing, and what answer are you going to say to not piss off the Knicks fans?
I thought about this a long time.
Okay.
I'm taking Knicks in 5.
Knicks in 5?
Taking Knicks in 5.
Why do you have Knicks in 5?
I think the offensive rebounding, I'm not sure, there's a point at which you can stress boxing out and being physical all you want. There's a point at which the personnel can't do it. Mm-hmm. And the Pacers I don't think they have the personnel to fight the Knicks on the boards. So I think you're going to see the Knicks, if they can rebound 35%, 40% of their misses, which is where they were in the fourth quarters against Philadelphia. They wore that team down. Philadelphia's got some size and length. The Pacers really don't. So I think the offensive rebounding is going to be a huge factor. And I think the playoff style, which generally slows things down, it is a more physical game. It's called tighter. The experience factor, this is really most of these Pacers' first go-around in this type of high-leverage games. I like I like the matchup for the Knicks. I think it's a really good matchup where they can impose their will on this Pacers team. And I don't know, for the way Halliburton's been playing, like if this was first half of the year Halliburton, where he was truly one of the best players in the league, I may have a different prediction. The way he's looked, and you can kind of take him out of his game at times, I just think the series really favors the Knicks. So I know it's aggressive. I could eat crow on it, but that's where I'm at. Knicks in 5.
Hey, man, you said it with your chest. Knicks in 5 here. I think the Knicks fans watching this will like that prediction. You're going with Knicks in 5. I agree with you.
All right.
We're on the same page with this prediction. I said this to somebody last night, and they were like, I don't know, that's a bit much. They were like, Knicks in 7. I said, I don't think this is going 7. Knicks in 5. Knicks back in the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time since 1999. That's what you got going on.
That sounds beautiful. That sounds.
Yeah, I think it does. I can't imagine. I think it will be beautiful for the Knicks fans. That is Ben Ritholtz. Check out his work with Knicks Film School. All the great work they do with KFS. Ben, enjoy the series. I appreciate you coming with me to break it all down, and we'll have to have you back on New York Got Game.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great opportunity. Appreciate it, Dexter.
Thank you, my man. Appreciate it. Okay, so we focused on the Knicks side of things, but we also have to break down this series from the Pacers side. And joining me to do that is one of my favorite writers covering the NBA and the Pacers. And like myself, she is a true NBA League Pass junkie, and I say that affectionately. She is the creator of Basketball She Wrote. It's a blog about basketball played by the Indiana Pacers. The one and only Caitlin Cooper joins me now. Caitlin, how's it going?
Hey, it's going good. I'm excited to talk about this. The first time the Pacers have won a playoff series in over a decade, and the first time that they've played the Knicks in a playoff series in over a decade. So exciting times. I
know. It is exciting times, and I think it's exciting for the fan bases on both sides and hopefully for the teams as well. So I'm so glad to be able to talk to you. And Caitlin, it's been a journey for this Pacers team this past season. I think at the start of the season, not many people had them as a lock for the playoffs or even being here, right, making it to the second round. What have you liked about how this team has evolved to get to where they are now?
You know, I think their evolution this season, a lot of it can be tied to them making the midseason trade for Pascal Siakam. I think when you go into the playoffs, philosophically, you can kind of look at teams in two different ways. Teams that can impose their own styles and teams that can adapt to other styles throughout a playoff run. And I think the Pacers positioned themselves by acquiring Pascal Siakam to be able to adapt to more styles, though they can still impose what they were at the beginning of the season, which was very much, you know, this fast-paced, high-octane offense. So they're still able to get to that. But a stat that I like to share with people is that this season they went 11-23 in games when they shot below 35% from three. But 6 of those 11 wins came in the last month, being March and April, with Siakam on the roster. So they started being able to find other ways to win. And even in that prior series against Milwaukee, you could see that, you know, they had some games where they shot below 35% from three. But game 4, they come out and they're still able to get a win because they really crashed the glass hard, got 19 offensive rebounds. And it's not just so tied to, can we get up and down and outrun opponents and outgun them from the three-point line? So I think that's kind of what I've liked the most about them in terms of their evolution. In the late season, Tyrese and some of the rest of the team went through a shooting slump, and in some ways that was kind of a blessing in disguise.
And that's what you want to see from a team throughout the season. You want to see that evolution and see that they can find different ways to win, because I think a lot of people think of the Pacers in this point as a team that can get out and run, which is, there's some truth to that in the data, but they are a little bit more than that. And we know that the Pacers beat a Bucks team that didn't have Giannis in the first round, but how much did you think Indiana winning that series is going to help this team's development and culture moving forward?
I think one of the biggest storylines from that series, honestly, was the development and emergence of Andrew Nembhard and Ben Shepherd. They ended up cutting their rotation down to an 8-man rotation, and their bench was very much a strength of theirs this season, the highest scoring bench in the NBA. And Ben Shepherd, as a rookie, was somebody who was part of that 8-man rotation. He was out there. And then to see Andrew Nembhard also being a starter, he's being tasked with guarding Damian Lillard at the point of attack. And then they also had him doing some more initiation because he wasn't being face guarded and pressured to the same way that Tyrese Halliburton was, and being able to use then Tyrese in more off-ball situations, use him as a screener. Andrew has some big scoring performances, but also a pretty big impact at the defensive end. It's very hard for teams to be able to win and get development at the same time, and he provided an intersection of that in the first round series, and I'm sure they're going to be leaning on him heavily in this series again because of who the star player is for the Knicks as well.
Yeah, absolutely will be leaning on him and seeing what that he can do. And I want to get into this, Caitlin, because looking at this matchup for the Pacers with the Knicks and knowing the history between the teams, what is the excitement level throughout Indiana for this matchup, and do you view this as a good matchup for the Pacers?
You know, it's funny because I have a lot of memories of the most recent series between the two teams when Roy Hibbert blocked Carmelo Anthony's shot at the rim and the rule of verticality and what that meant for that era of basketball. But I would have been a toddler during the Reggie Miller, New York time. So I don't have quite the same connection to that. But even just since releasing my preview, I've had a lot of Pacer fans be like, hey, those series are what made me a Pacer fan. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this, rivalry getting renewed. And hopefully that both of these teams will continue to be in the playoffs. I think they're positioned to be that way. And maybe there can be multiple meetings again like there were in the 90s. I think overall, like when you're looking at this as a matchup for the Pacers, I think when you look at them against the Knicks in particular, I think it all starts with Jalen Brunson and how the Pacers are going to defend him. When you look at the games in February, Brunson had a 40-plus point scoring effort. They end up getting into the fourth quarter of that game. The Pacers are having to trap a lot, and the Knicks ended up finishing with 24 offensive rebounds. 10 offensive rebounds in the fourth quarter, particularly when they were doing a lot of trapping. So how did the Pacers find that balance? They don't really have the same defenders that the Sixers did in the prior series where maybe you can throw some length and discipline at Brunson. Andrew Nembhard, I think, is a very strong point of attack defender, but even with that, Brunson's overall ability to, litany of the pump fake is difficult, especially for a second-year player. So how many bodies are they going to be willing to throw there? And then also, I think the Knicks have developed over the course of this season, and it not just being so many isolations for Jalen Brunson, but also that there's off-ball movement surrounding that. So if you are really stunting in, the Knicks might be able to test that as well. So I think for the Pacers, a lot of it, because of what their high-paced style is, it's kind of going to be a battle between rebounding and pace in a lot of respects. These two teams are so different stylistically.
Yeah, they're so different stylistically, which makes this matchup so interesting, at least in my opinion here. And you talked about the pace, and the Pacers, they were number one in the NBA in points per game. They were second in pace this season. What makes this Pacers offense so explosive? Because people see the numbers that they can put up there, Caitlin, but what makes this Pacers offense so explosive?
I think a big part of it is that they are willing to run off of makes as well as misses. You'll see Tyrese a lot of times before if the shot goes in for the Knicks, he'll be peeking over his shoulder. He wastes no time. He's already looking down for where hit-ahead passes can be, where the lay of the land is, and that's something that when you play the Pacers, you have to be cognizant that they're going to run it back on you, and you have to be looking for those hit-ahead passes. You cannot be flat-footed, because another one that I really like is that Tyrese and Jalen are the top two guards in the NBA at rejecting screens, and the way that Tyrese goes about that a lot of times is he's applying so much pressure in transition that it can become really easy for his defender to get flat-footed. Then he's rejecting that pick, and then maybe you're giving up a corner three. So it all starts there. I think mainly that's what their identity is, but also in the half court, they play with a lot of speed too. They get into multiple actions very quickly. They're able to flow between actions very quickly. So I think that's what's led to it being it wasn't as much as it was in the early portion of the season post-trade while Tyrese was dealing with an injury and they were trying to incorporate Siakam. But obviously we saw even against the Bucks series that there were games where they still had a transition frequency up over 18% in a playoff game, which that would have been higher than any regular season team this season.
Yeah, and that's still what's very impressive, just the ability to get out into transition. And as you mentioned, running off of the makes, they're willing to do that as well, too. But when we talk about the pace, Caitlin, we have seen the pace of play for Indy go down in the postseason, which is to be expected. We know things slow down a bit in half court in the postseason. What are your thoughts on how this team has looked playing a slower pace than they did in the regular season? And what do you make of their half court offense versus the Knicks defense?
Yeah, I think most people were probably expecting the Pacers to close it out in Game 5, given that Damian Lillard and Giannis weren't playing. And something that Doc Rivers went to that I give them credit for is that he was just like, our backs are against the wall. We're going to try to switch everything, even if that includes Brook Lopez. And if we get him on an island, we'll go switch to blitz. They ended up cross-matching Brook Lopez in the second half of that game onto Aaron Nesmith so they could keep switching ball screens. That's typically the best method for defending Tyrese Haliburton and the Pacers. He typically leans on creating separation with his three-point shot more often than he does driving those switches. And while they have gained a lot with Siakam and there was reasons for them to move on from Buddy Hield was somebody who gave them a means to, ghost those switches and provide some traction for Tyrese to get downhill. So as far as that applies to the Knicks, that's something to watch out for, I think, in the half court, because the Knicks ranked 29th in switch frequency this year. Tyrese typically has a lot better sledding against drop coverage because of what he is as an elite pull-up threat. So I think that the Knicks do want to contain them in the half court, but I'm going to be interested to find out how they find means to be able to still switch against him on the perimeter with what defensive options they have, and how much full court pressure that they can apply between, OG Anunoby and Dante DiVincenzo, if those start out to be some of his primary defenders, because that's a good way to not only slow down the pace in the half court, but also remove him and what he does as an orchestrator and a creator in the pick and roll.
Yeah, very interesting to see what the Knicks will do to try to get the ball out of his hands early in the shot clock in terms of offense, something to keep an eye on there, too. Now, this is a Pacers team that got better as the season went along. They finished in the middle of the pack defensively. What will the Pacers need to take away from the Knicks if they are to win this series, and what will you be keeping an eye on with them in terms of defensive execution?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's what I mentioned before, the give and take between trapping Brunson and what they might give up on the offensive glass if they do that. And then also the Knicks are hunters, right? Like I mentioned in the prior series against Milwaukee, Tyrese Haliburton was only the screener defender on 18 screens. They weren't really going after him as a weak link relentlessly. I expect the Knicks to do that a lot more. Just in 3 regular season games, he was the screener defender on 24 picks. So if he's going to be put into the action, how effective can he be with show coverage and being able to get back to his defender or potentially peeling off to the perimeter? I think that's definitely going to be something to watch. And the same in the reverse, I think, to an extent, because if they can't slow down Jalen Brunson in the half court because they don't have quite as much length to throw at him as maybe some other opponents might be able to, what are they doing to make him work defensively to perhaps slow down what he's doing offensively as well? And the Pacers aren't necessarily as much of an isolation team, but I do think that there's some ways that they could potentially, be picking on him as a weak side tagger and other ways to drain out what he's going to be doing offensively as well. So I would definitely be looking at how many picks Tyrese is being put into very early from the Knicks side of things.
They're very interested to see how they attack Haliburton in this series in terms of the Knicks on offense. We always like to talk about X factors in a series, Caitlin. Who is the player that has to be an X factor in this series for Indy?
This is going to be a little bit of a cheat, but I almost think it's the bench as a whole. They did cut down the rotation to an 8-man. We saw how important T.J. McConnell and Obi Toppin just were in that Game 6 and closing out the Bucks. We know that the Knicks are going to play. They've been playing virtually a 7-man rotation. Guys are playing up over 40 minutes. If the Pacers are going to be playing at a fast pace, it behooves them to be playing more bodies and be able to keep their starters fresh at the end of a game. So how deep can they play and how much production can they get out of the bench against what is going to be a shorter Knicks rotation? I think that's really going to be the X factor for the Pacers in this series. I
like that as an X factor there, and it'll be interesting to see if Tom Thibodeau expands his rotation at all in this series. Do we see Precious Chichua maybe play a little bit more, go to 8 guys in the rotation? We will see how that goes. Okay, Caitlin, last thing for me. Pacers are underdogs in this series. If they are to knock off the Knicks, what has to happen here overall in this Eastern Conference showdown for Indiana to pull off the upset?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a little bit corny, but I think it's going to come down to a lot of defensive discipline that wasn't necessarily there consistently for them in the first round series that we just watched. Also, a lot of discipline in the shot goes up. We have to be looking for Josh Hart, maybe even some chest-to-chest box outs to be able to keep him off of the glass. And then also just them being true to themselves and being able to maintain the identity that they've had throughout the entire season. If they can play with that degree of pace, they have a chance against a team that's very good at winning the possession war against opponents to be able to rack up and hopefully even some of that out.
And that's been the calling card for the Knicks, them winning the possession, opponents getting extra possessions against their opponents constantly, and that's just been something they do. I think this is going to be fascinating, Caitlin. It is going to be a very interesting series. I'm excited for it. I know you're excited for it too, everyone. That is Caitlin Cooper. She's the creator of Basketball She Wrote. Go check that out. It's a fantastic blog about the Indiana Pacers. Caitlin, appreciate you coming on. Appreciate the time. Help me break this out on New York Got Game. And we will connect down the road. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me.
The Knicks are on fire!
All right, we'll see what the Knicks do in this series against the Pacers as we are in the heart of playoff season. Knicks fans are excited to see if the Knicks can win another series and get back to the conference finals. When we join you next week, or you join us, it'll be after Game 4. So where will the Knicks be in the series? Will they have swept the Pacers? That would be nice for Knicks fans. It'll be a little bit better of a prediction than we heard from Ben. He said Knicks in 5. I think people would like to see the Knicks win in 4, but we'll see where they are then. That does it for this edition of New York Got Game. Gotta give special thanks to my guests, Caitlin Cooper and Ben Ritholtz. Also, gotta thank my editors working on this, Jim Valver and Matt Olshan, producer Lee Insler, and director Zach Taub. I'm Dexter Henry. We will see you next week for another playoff edition of New York Got Game.
And thanks for watching New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.